Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. So first of all, welcome and thank you for taking the time to join us today at the ABNY YP and ABNY Census 2020 AMA, or Ask Me Anything, with Aliya Bhatia. I'm Sarah Samuels, the Programs and Communication Manager at ABNY, and if you have any questions following this webinar, please feel free to reach out to me or any member of the ABNY team. We hope that you're all staying well and healthy. The 2020 census affects the amount of funding and representation that New York receives, and this trickles down to almost every facet of New York life. An accurate count is crucial now more than ever, especially with everything that's going on today. So I'd like to take the time to introduce Aliya Bhatia. She's a census manager, at ABNY, where she supports the organization's Census 2020 initiative for an accurate count. She works at the intersection of technology, access, communication, and digital strategy, and community outreach. Previously, she was a technology fellow at Columbia's Entrepreneurship and Policy Initiative and served as a research assistant at Brookings Institution's Metropolitan Policy Program. She conducted a graduate research project with New York Immigration Coalition on the state of sanctuary policy across the state. Aliya also spent 4 years working as a political strategist in Toronto, and she received her BA in International Relations and Art History at University of Toronto and MPA in Urban Policy and Technology at Columbia University. Thank you so much all for joining us, and with that, I'll pass it over to Aliya.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aliya, and thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and really excited to do this. First, I'd like to kind of talk about why we are doing this. So, Sarah and I have spoken about this, and in my work working as a census manager, and I'm sure everyone who's working on the census can kind of attest to this, you get a lot of questions in your sort of daily work and personal life about the census constantly. And a lot of our efforts have been to kind of get at the count across New York, across the 5 boroughs, and across particularly what we call hard to count communities. So communities that are kind of traditionally and chronically undercounted because they are either hard to count, they are, for myriad reasons that we'll get into in a few seconds. But there's just a lot of sort of operational questions that I also get asked, like, okay, I live in New York for half of the time. Should I be counted there? I live with roommates I don't know. Should I count them? I kind of split my time doing several internships. I don't have a permanent address. Do I have to be counted where I vote? So, we really wanted to do this and kind of create a space for people to ask questions that are specifically tailored to, people like us, young professionals, and also kind of just equip you with the answers so then you can go out and count your families, your friends, your loved ones, and just become a census ambassador yourself. And so this is really that space to ask me anything within reason about the census, and also really talk about what the census means specifically now during an unprecedented public health crisis. And so, as you know, the decennial census counts each and every person living in the United States once every 10 years. This is different from other kind of forms and levers that the Census Bureau has to count communities. But the purpose of this count specifically is just a population count. It is a count of every individual who lives in the United States on April 1st, 2020. April 1st, 2020 is just a benchmark, a kind of day that we use to answer a lot of these questions. And counts everyone regardless of immigration status, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of age, background, income, nationality, anything. So really, we want to kind of reiterate that multiple times because there has been a lot of news around the census and specifically around the changes to the 2020 census. So if we backtrack a little bit, the census has been asking or has been doing this population count since it's constitutionally mandated since 1790. And in 2020, there were a number of changes. So number one, this is the first time the census is conducted online, and we can go over, what that looks like and how you actually, where you do it, how you do it. But this is the first time it's online, which is a huge opportunity, especially now, right? We are hopefully all socially distancing. We're all hopefully safe and healthy and taking care of our neighbors and communities by staying at home. That doesn't mean work stops there. And we, thankfully have this opportunity to complete the census online and encourage others to complete it online and on the phone um, if that's preferred. The second is we this is the first time there's been a reduction in Census Bureau staff and funding since the last few years, and so that's made it kind of difficult also in the past to reach everyone. And then third thing is, as you may have heard, there was a citizenship question that was added that was supposed to be added on the census. Again, it is not on the census, but because of that kind of conversation, a lot of our communities, specifically immigrant communities or communities that live in multi status households where someone is a citizen, someone is applying, someone is not, it gets kind of worrisome for them. And a lot of communities were kind of confused around that. And so we're still dealing with the sort of ramifications, the backlash to that. And of course, right now, the fourth mega change is that communities are now, more separated than they were initially. And so much of the sort of public outreach plans that we had envisioned, going to where people were, like summer concerts, clinics, offices, happy hours, all of these spaces that we were going to be doing outreach. We have seen a need for us and also all of the other advocates to kind of pivot away from that and pursue more digital outreach strategies. And I think, this is really a conversation to get a lot of your questions answered, but we'll be going into how you can play a role specifically to help and amplify that digital outreach plan. Let me just quickly share my screen, and it'll just serve as kind of a backdrop to the conversation. I know many of you have already submitted questions to begin with, and we've gotten a lot of submitted questions. So we'll go into that. A couple of housekeeping notes. So everyone is muted right now, so that's great. Number two, we'll be going through the first few submitted questions, which should take kind of the 15, 20 minutes of this AMA, and then we'll open it up live for any follow-up questions and also any other questions. And the way we'll do that is we'll use the chat functionality. And so I have a couple of people kind of monitoring the chat. If you can go into it, it should be there's a little chat button, and you can kind of pin that to your pin that column as well to your right of the screen. So you can just go in, write your questions, and then at the end of the sort of pre-submitted questions, I'll go over those and read them out loud and answer them from the group. And then feel free to kind of follow up if you have, more tailored questions, things like that. And the reason for that is so, everyone can kind of benefit from the answer, and we do this kind of strategically. And then at the end, I'll also go through sort of more resources to find more information, as well as what are next steps, or what can we do, especially now, to get out the count. So I'm just gonna post this over here. And yeah, so right now, I was just speaking briefly to the changes to the census. And, ABNY has been in this work since late 2018, early 2019. So ABNY's role really before the public health crisis, and now especially now after this period of social distancing, was always to kind of engage a lot of different types of partners and actors around getting out the count for the census. So we saw the census as fundamentally a sort of quality of life issue for New York. The census affects, as Sarah mentioned, the the allocation of billions of federal funds to everyday programs and services that we rely on every day. All the things we love and miss about New York so much when we're quarantined indoors is kind of made better with the census. And so that is federal funds to support hospitals, parks, schools. The DOE, receives billions in funding from the census alone. Um, our parks, our everyday programs that our neighborhoods rely on, like food stamps, Section 8 affordable vouchers, Medicaid, Medicare, and CHIP, children health insurance plan. All of these programs that we rely on every day are dependent solely to the population count on the census. Sarah also mentioned representation. So the count of every individual who lives in the United States at a certain time also determines the drawing of federal congressional lines, as well as school district lines and state legislature lines. What does that mean? That means how many representatives represent the interests of New Yorkers, of Americans, and of people living in their certain community is determined by the census. And so the way this manifests also is how much how many interests go to the House of Representatives and fight for our interests, but also how long you have to wait to talk to your congressional representative when they come to a neighborhood meeting in your neighborhood, or whether at all they come to your neighborhood for outreach or meetings. So all of this is dependent on the census. And fundamentally, I think the census is sort of a proxy vote, right? It is a way for everyone who lives here to say, we count, we want our interests represented, and we're here, we have needs. And especially now we can see that, being able to adequately prepare for future needs, right? The count is now, but the count will determine billions in funding, and also decisions policymakers, advocates are going to make for the next 10 years. So it's really crucial now more than ever to complete the census and to understand who lives here and what our needs are. So ABNY's work specifically has been to kind of encourage everyone, community-based organizations, the private sector, labor, and other organizations, government, to really work together on this and have everyone kind of saying the same thing, coordinated with a coordinated message, and really just getting out the count, talking about the count constantly. Why I kind of got into this work, my interest, as Sarah mentioned, was really from the get-go about how do we kind of get civically involved when we can't vote. As Sarah mentioned, I have a little bit of a background in digital rights, in immigration policy, and I found this to be like the perfect confluence of that. And to me, the census is, one of the best ways you can get involved and count everyone. So I'm going to go into some of the first submitted questions, and I just want to be cognizant that everyone can hear me. So the first question that was submitted, and there was a bunch of questions like this, and this is actually the first question I get a lot, is my roommate and I all got census mailers. Who's supposed to fill it out? Do I have to wait for my roommates to fill it out, or do we all fill it out separately? And this is the question I get most often, because if you're like me, you live with roommates, a lot of roommates, you either live with roommates you don't know very well, or you move very often, and so have to kind of regain that relationship with roommates. And the easy answer to this is one form or one census form per household, right? So if you live with multiple roommates, the first step is to maybe text the group chat, maybe coordinate everyone on one evening to get everyone together and designate one person to complete the form for the household. Many of you may have received either the paper questionnaire or more likely the postcard or letter that sends you to a URL, my2020census.gov, with a unique census ID. This is really critical. The census ID kind of determines you being counted where you're at with your, uniquely in your address once and only once. And so using that unique ID, designate one person. And where you really do need your roommates to comply is two primary questions. So one is the everyone's birth date will be asked so that because the count is includes age, and no matter what age you're counted. And then the second kind of opportunity to kind of involve them is also the race and ethnicity questions. How they identify. The census is an extremely personal and kind of powerful way to self-identify. And we know that the census in the past has identified folks for them. So really asking them the two questions 8 and 9. The first will ask you Hispanic ethnicity or of Hispanic origin. If you do not identify with that, you can skip that question, and then, or there's an answer that says not applicable. And then question 9 will ask about race, and also which country of origin or ethnicity you identify with. The next question, and a good follow-up to this other question, is I live in New York, but because of COVID-19, I'm stuck on my college campus in California. In what state do I fill out the census? So there's a lot of different moving pieces here and a lot of different types of questions here, right? I live in New York and I'm stuck or quarantined because of the COVID-19 elsewhere, and I'm stuck on a college campus. So let me just answer first. If you live in New York and you're quarantined outside of New York, that is up to you. The purpose of the census is to count you where you are usually, where you are most of the time. And the April 1st, 2020 benchmark asks you where you are on April 1st, 2020. We are in unprecedented times, right? And the purpose of the census is to count the population to determine funding and policy decisions for the next 10 years. So if you envision yourself coming back to New York, if you envision yourself living in New York, and this is a temporary quarantine elsewhere, maybe in a family or friend's house out of state, this is your personal decision to choose the community that you want to be counted in, and you want your count to determine the policies and the funding for the next 10 years. So if you live in New York most of the time, you choose New York. If you live elsewhere and you come in New York sometimes, then you can choose elsewhere. If you're quarantined elsewhere and you say, I want to be counted elsewhere, that's also up to you. But that, I think the thought process is really around where do you want your count to be, and which neighborhood do you identify with and want the funds and the policies to go to. And then the college campus part. So usually the way people are counted on campuses, or specifically college housing, so campus housing like dorms and things like that, is that there is something called the early NRFU, the non-response follow-up period, that usually happens at the end of April, early May period. Now, because of COVID-19 and because a lot of colleges have been shut during this time, the Census Bureau has actually pushed this to the fall. And the purpose of this is because they have to partner with college campus administrators and dorm administrators in a process called group enumeration. You're all a group, we count you together to count you where you're at. So now, of course, a lot of people have been kind of moved outside dorms, and classes are all online. So this process has been moved, like a lot of other processes. And so, again, we go back to part one of this, which is if you are quarantined outside where you usually are, it's a personal decision of where you want to be counted. Again, I live in NYC, but I've moved to my parents' house in Maryland for the foreseeable future. Where should I fill out the census? Again, a personal decision where you want to be counted, and where you want your count to matter. Should I include the fact that I'm Jewish on my census form? So, again, the questions for ethnicity and race are questions 8 and 9. Question 8 goes into Hispanic origin, and question 9 goes into race. If you see, and this is again a very personal question, if you see your identity as being Jewish as an ethnicity, then you can choose the race that you identify with on question 9 and write that in. There is no box that will ask you to select that option, but the existing options on the form are questions 8 and question 9 about ethnicity, self-identification, and race. And there are boxes for you to write that down if you see your Jewish identity as an ethnicity. I live with my partner and she's expecting a baby in April. How many people should I include on my census form? I actually love this question, because I think it's like a hopeful and optimistic question. But also there's like a super technical answer to this. So if your baby is born before April 1st, 2020, well, congratulations on your baby. They count, right? You put their birth date on the form as a third household, or, n number of household members. If your baby is not born yet, it is after April 1st. And so we use April 1st as that benchmark. And I'm not sure on the form if you can put a birth date after April 1st, 2020, but I suspect not. If your baby has not been born yet, but it's April 14th, it's still in the middle of April, then that baby does not count for this period, because we are counting, people with birthdays, already born, living in the United States on April 1st, 2020. I have been ordering groceries for my elderly neighbor, and he recently asked me for help filling out his form. Am I allowed to submit the form for him, and can I do it for my computer? So I'm very thankful that you're helping your neighbor and encouraging them to fill out the form, but there are certain limitations on how much you can help. My response to this would be to guide them to fill it out by themselves online, or if clearly the reason this came up is because they don't feel comfortable doing that, there are a number of hotlines that I can share at the end, where individuals can complete the form on the phone, and you can complete the census on the phone in multiple languages if that is also of interest. A lot of communities that we've spoken to, on the phone access is actually a critical part and a really easy part for them to complete the census. Same 9 to 10 questions depending on how many people in your household. Really easy on the phone, and kind of allows you to support them without doing the form for them. So we really recommend encouraging them to call the hotline. I'll share the number at the end. My friends who are US citizens living in Japan asked whether or not they should fill out the census. Because they're not living in the US presently. So no, right? So the census is, again, a count of every individual living in the United States on April 1st, 2020. That's not a count of US citizens writ large. And, there are several other levers where, the federal administration partners with consulates and embassies around the world to count every US citizen and, understand how many US citizens live abroad. This is a count of every individual living in the United States on April 1st, 2020. So if you are a US citizen living outside April 1st, 2020, you do not count. So one of these questions is, how will the census get going with all of the families with COVID-19? Some families don't have computers to get the census done. So this is a large issue, right? So earlier I was talking about the huge opportunity we have with the census going online. Um, this year, this time for the first time. This is also a challenge sometimes because a lot of communities we know, according to lots of reports, including by Comptroller Stringer, the Digital Equity Lab, we know that digital penetration and digital access rates in certain communities are larger than the other. And so we understand that in some communities, people don't have um, computers to get the census done. So the response to this is twofold. So one, this is again another opportunity for us to encourage people to complete it on the phone if they can. Again, I will share the hotlines in a bit, but there are other options if you cannot complete the census on your own, in your personal space, on your computer with reliable broadband internet. So there's the phone. Individuals will also, if they have not completed the census, will also receive a paper questionnaire as their fifth mailing. And this allows, a lot of communities already have received a paper questionnaire, and this allows individuals who prefer to fill it out on paper to fill it out and then go to their post office and mail it with return postage already stamped. Um, Again, this is a huge issue, and there are a lot of groups kind of working on this. Initially, kind of before COVID-19, we were really championing this effort and really creating. One of our goals was to create resource centers around providing access to individuals with low technology access by providing kind of tablets, computers to public spaces to allow individuals to complete the form. Now, with COVID-19, it's almost as if the Bureau has been preparing for this sort of issue for so long, understanding that the Census Bureau has now allowed people to complete the form online. So that's a huge boon. But individuals who cannot do it online in their households are encouraged to complete the form on phone and to the paper questionnaire. Yes, sorry, I was just monitoring the chat. Okay. Is the response rate in New York City higher or lower than the rest of the country? And how does the once in a decade census differ from smaller surveys the Census Bureau does in other years? So, great question. So, the short story is that the response rate in New York City is lower than the national average, and that is because of a lot of different factors. One is New York City has a huge population of communities that are traditionally called these hard to reach communities. So hard to reach is a super, census technical term to just convey a lot of communities who don't usually self-respond on the census. And so these communities kind of include immigrant communities who in the past have not completed the census because of distrust in government or being hard to reach. This includes communities of color who similarly have distrust for government, don't want someone knocking on their door. Again, this is pre-census being online. Don't want someone they don't know from the government to knock on their door. This is communities who have doubled up households. So we know in New York there are a lot of units that are like basement apartments, a house turned into like 7 apartments, households that undercount themselves because they have two families living in one family. They don't want their landlord to know that they're doubled up. This includes communities that either work multiple jobs or are single mothers who just literally just do not have time or are never home to open the door to answer this form. And so it kind of runs the gamut. We know New Yorkers have a lot of different types of living arrangements, and that just makes the count for our city much harder. But that does not excuse the fact that our response rate in 2010 was significantly lower than the national average. I think the national response rate in 2010 was 76%, and the New York City self-response rate was 67. That is terrible. And then in communities, maybe some of you live in, we know in central Brooklyn, we know in parts of Queens, um, there was just an even lower self-response rate. And this has ramifications for the next 10 years, right? For generations of how many representatives we have. New York has lost one congressional representative every decennial census since 1940, and is slated to lose two more. And this is a huge issue, right? We know the U.S. has a finite number of House of Representatives. So when we lose one, it is not an absolute loss. It gets reapportioned to another to another new district or another state, and that's not great. We want representatives who fight for New York interests. So is the response rate lower? Yes. What does that mean? This is an urgent and even maybe now more urgent need for us to get at the count, us to talk about the census and really ensure that our households, our families, our loved ones, our friends, our acquaintances, people that we don't even know that well, complete the census. And how does the once a decade census differ from smaller surveys? So that's a great question. The Census Bureau doesn't sleep during the period where the census is not happening. There are a lot of different types of surveys and forms the Census Bureau kind of undertakes to count different parts of our community and to conduct different counts, right? Conduct more than just a population count. So one that is probably is like a little more popular than the others is the American Community Survey or the long form census. The American Community Survey is essentially a long form version of the census and counts lots of different things. It asks specifically for immigration status as well. It asks for median income. It asks for rent, home ownership versus rent, lots of different questions. And it is sent out to 2.76% of the population. So where this is a count of every individual living in the United States, that is a sample count. So, through statistical measures, they do a sampling of 2.7% of the population to understand kind of the general or average shifts in who lives in America and what constitutes their lifestyle. And then there are economic surveys as well, account of businesses, small businesses, jobs provided, services rendered, and lots of different counts. The Census Bureau is a great resource for a lot of the research we have done, either as advocates or as students in the past, and really is just a self-portrait of the nation. So all of these counts kind of together paint this like vibrant picture of the United States, of the services offered. The decennial is it has only 10 questions. It is briefer and it is strictly a population count, right? This is not data that is aggregated and compiled to understand what Aliya is doing in Brooklyn on a certain date. It is really just a count of every individual living here on April 1st, 2020. I live with 3 roommates who don't care about the census. How could I provide their info without their birthdays? Again, we answered this, but it honestly, two answers to this. Number one, if we talk about the census, I think people will care. I think people are going to open their eyes and be like, okay, what's happening? But I also hear you. One answer to this, which we talk about internally, is, you can check on Facebook what their birthdays are. But I think the easier way of doing this is just to send a group text or, when you see them in the kitchen, just, ask for their sort of information, their consent to do this. Just send a group text or, a group email or however best you communicate usually to pay rent or pay utilities. And just say, hey, I'm going to do this. Do you want to be a part of it? Do you want to do this together? Or if not, can you send me the following information? And again, that is birthday and how they identify ethnically and racially for questions 8 and 9. How can we successfully conduct a census campaign using social media during the current climate we're facing? That's a great question. And I think from the get-go, from the beginning, the census and different stakeholders and actors who work in the census knew that the way we were going to count every single person living in New York, living in America, and especially these communities that were hard to reach by the traditional Census Bureau was through trusted messengers, right? And so, who do we mean when we say trusted messengers? We mean either your faith leader, either the matriarch, either a local celebrity, either elected official. Every community has this one person that we just trust. We just believe they are either the census nerd in their WhatsApp group who is always talking about the census. They're that person who reminds everyone to register to vote on time. They're the person to say, hey, wear a mask when you go out. And it could be anyone, right? It could be we all have our different versions of trusted messengers. For some communities, it is a local newspaper in their language. For some communities, it's social media, parts of social media that is culturally more engaged and relevant and relatable for a certain group. For the young people, maybe even millennials now, maybe it's TikTok. Who knows what's happening on TikTok? So every group has its own trusted kind of both messenger who like gets it, but also social media platform. And so the answer to this is no. There's no sort of one size fits all, but we do all have a role to play to amplify on social media. We know that people are actually using social media increasingly more than ever before during this period because it is so hard to be connected to each other and talk to each other during this time that's kind of frankly isolating, right? And so ways you can do that is and ways advocates have done this is we're sharing very visual heavy engaging content on social media. Number two, we are kind of testing and trying, advocates are testing and trying every platform to see what sticks, right? To reiterate the message, get to where people are, and get to people where people are acknowledging how they're using social media. So if you're using Instagram, how can we create punchy videos, Instagram lives, and really creative content to reach communities? If you're using Twitter, how can we give very, relevant information, the URL in every tweet so that people just like know how to digest the information and then go complete the census? We're also, through ABNY's pop-up agency and a lot of other initiatives, providing partners and organizations with language to then amplify, to tweet, to share, to retweet other people, so that, everyone has the same message and also is kind of amplifying that same message. And then, we all have a role to play. And I think, I'm going to reiterate that over and over again, but we are also digital and social media natives in some ways. We live on social media, we share what we're eating. And so it's not completely out of the blue for us or our organizations, Twitters, Instagrams, Facebooks, to share about the census as well. And so social media is fundamentally critical. I know from my family alone, Facebook and WhatsApp is how they're getting most of their COVID news, and sharing it within our social networks is like fundamentally a very human thing to do. So we too can kind of ingrain the census language, the need for the census now, and just let our friends know we're completing the census. Are you? Yeah, and then low response rate. So this isn't totally a question, but again, I'll just reiterate. There are a lot of communities that have low response rates, and one resource I would suggest you refer to, and it's on my resource slide as well, is the CUNY Hard to Count map. And so the CUNY Hard to Count map is a live map of where communities are self-responding, and it also per census tract, and also you can compare it to the census, the response rates in 2010, and also other factors, digital access rates, um, population of communities of a certain group, and it helps you understand where the low response rates are. Again, traditionally, Queens, Central Brooklyn, parts of the Bronx have been lower counted. Also, Central East Harlem. But with all of us, we're seeing these response rates kind of increase steadily, and that's really hopeful. And I think our role here is to continue to get at the count. So let me just see if there are any more questions, and then we'll go into um, if you have a question right now that either you think that I have not answered yet, or you want to follow up on or get more information, please post it into the webinar chat right now. We'll just spend a few minutes doing that, and then I can just go through some next steps. This is obviously just the beginning of your census evangelism and so much of the work. Um, a little more information is that the Federal Census Bureau has extended the census period, which is a huge opportunity, right? We totally understand that right now the census is not top of mind for everyone. A lot of communities are prioritizing keeping healthy, keeping their neighbors healthy, keeping everyone safe, and also doing essential work during this time. So we understand that. The Census Bureau has extended the period and the non-response follow-up period, which is the period where the Census Bureau goes out and kind of knocks on doors and asks everyone to complete the form if they haven't already online or on the paper questionnaire. And so they've extended it into October 31st. And then the group enumeration phases that I was referring to, dorms, other group facilities, has been extended into the fall as well. And some of it has been up for review. And so because of that, we have a huge opportunity to keep reiterating this message. And keep pushing communities, and hopefully we'll be this we'll see the curve kind of flatten and communities will kind of start phasing in, but even in the meanwhile we need to get this completed. So someone has a question. My organization, Witness to Mass Incarceration, is focusing on counting formerly incarcerated justice involved people. Beginning May 1st, we're having Zoom parties for each borough. That's amazing. Love that idea. I really do recommend a lot of groups to see these kind of milestone days, May 1st, or even just any day to have these Zoom parties or sort of Zoom happy hours or ingrained census messaging into even check-ins. I would like a speaker for each Zoom party to discuss why to fill out the census and civic engagement. Where can I find a speaker? So this is a really great question. I think there are a lot of other groups working on this. And so maybe if you could, this is kind of a question where we need more information, and feel free to email us. I'll write my email in the chat. But definitely something to brainstorm. I think having a speaker would be great. And definitely having a speaker maybe who's been involved, just involved to talk with authority, but also there are, again, as I mentioned earlier, lots of other trusted messengers to talk about the importance of the census, and maybe, there's a lot to brainstorm here. Please give us tips on how to motivate people living in hard to count areas to answer the census, specifically when we call them now, when some of these areas are surviving the virus. Again, so completely understand and acknowledge this is not the top of mind for a lot of communities, and we want to be respectful of that. We want to encourage that. With that said, I think the census is fundamentally a part of the sort of recovery efforts that we need, and the sort of community aid the sort of, community love efforts that we need during these times, right? As people are surviving the virus and as people are feeling, um, dismayed, there is such a need for optimism right now. And there's a need to understand that there are steps that we need to take to prepare for the next virus. And I think the census is a way to say, okay, after this, how are we going to rebuild our communities? How are we going to know where the need lies? And I think counting us is a huge part of that. So, to that, I would say, when you are talking to people, be cognizant of the sort of, where they're at. But reiterating the need to do sort of preparatory work, the need to complete the census, especially now when the census count determines the sort of funding our communities gets, for small businesses to open up in the future, for healthcare clinics, for healthcare organizations to understand how many people live in a community, how many people need health insurance, for in the future when communities rely on food stamps and unemployment insurance and public education and parks for a quality of life that all of us deserve. I think the census is one small step that we can do. And I know a lot of you, through your organizations, um, are probably also, through your organizations or privately, are also part of mutual aid efforts, are calling up seniors to help with groceries, or helping, just calling people because they're lonely and they're sad. The census is part of that, right? I know personally, I'm so, maybe this is just me, I'm tired of my friends calling me and saying, how are you, right? Like, I'm the same, I'm feeling so many feelings all the time. But talking about the census, if these communities have not filled it out, if your loved ones have not done it, it takes, so little time. And it's just like a good, optimistic reprieve from the sort of day to day that we are living in unprecedented times. And I'm going to take this one last question and then just jump to a couple of next steps. So sorry for the delay. One of our charity helped several seniors who just passed away this week from COVID-19, but he would have wanted his census submitted. This is a really tough question to answer and really sad. We know that he would have probably wanted the form to be filled out. I don't know when this happened, obviously, but again, the census does count, living individuals living on April 1st, 2020. And so I think that is, again, a personal question if, they were alive on April 1st. But, you know, the technical answer is that the census counts living individuals, um, and not past individuals. Okay, so I'm just going to go into the rest of the deck. So, what can you do now, right? If you haven't done it, I hope we have conveyed the importance of completing the census. Go to my2020census.gov online, complete it, please, for your family. Even if your family is being stubborn, you have to complete it for them, help them. For your friends, just remind everyone, please complete the census and do it now, hopefully. And you're all on the Zoom call, so we really recommend doing it online. Remind a friend or a loved one to complete the census. So now when we're calling individuals to check in on them, ask them to complete the census. This does not take a long time. If you're on Zoom, if you're on House Party, it doesn't take time, and you can actually even make it an activity, right? Take a few minutes. Hey, how are you doing? Have you completed the census yet? My2020census.gov. Watch them do it. It's not that hard, and I think we can do that. That's the least we can do right now. Share with your friends. So all of us are connected on social media. We have organizations. We urge you to tweet about the census and share on Instagram. One thing that my friends have all been doing is every time they complete the census, they tag me in it and I share their post. And that's just an easy way to, we all are influential members in our own friend groups. Even if you love us, hate us, we are a way to kind of spread the message. But also, as one of the organizations mentioned, really leverage that May 1st deadline and commit to tweeting and sharing about the census. A Twitter storm, planning a Twitter storm, planning an Instagram live, while you're making a cocktail, asking people to complete the census, while you're walking your dog, talking about the census. This is something you can do, and putting it on the calendar for May 1st is something you can do right now. Mention it at your local grocery store, building tenant board. If you're on Nextdoor, or your mutual aid society, or any organizations or networks you're in. So I hope at the end of this, you have left with your next step, which is to share on social media and tag us at ABNY Census 2020 and A Better New York, because this is how we're going to get everyone counted, and this is how we're going to get New York to build back up after this. And then, since a lot of the questions kind of dove into this, I just also wanted to loop back into some key resources that you can use for more information. The Census Bureau is a huge repository of information, and sometimes it's intimidating. So we totally get that. We have linked to a couple of documents that we think are super helpful. So Census 101 Census Bureau at 2020census.gov is super helpful. What does the questionnaire look like? If you haven't done it, well, you'll learn what the questionnaire looks like when you do it, but you can share what the questionnaire looks like if people have questions before they complete it. Who should be counted where? All these resources. And also want to plug abnycensus2020.org. We've done the work of combing through all the resources, sorting them out based on your questions. And I really recommend going to our website for a quick snapshot of what you need to know. And also just resources. You can send a friend who's being stubborn. You can send your auntie who's being stubborn. Getting everyone counted is what we can do right now. And again, right, questions about why we ask, what does the census fund? These are really important questions now more than ever. So abnycensus2020.org. I look forward to your tweets, your Instagrams, tagging at ABNY Census 2020 and at A Better New York on May 1st, if not before. If you haven't completed the census, this is what you're doing right after this. And thank you so much.